All right, Proverbs. We are going to start in Proverbs chapter 26. We have covered a lot of ground, and I have hit a lot of verses, and we've pretty well just went from roughly chapter 10. We've made it all the way up to chapter 26, trying to hit all of those different things about how the Proverbs covers the things we say, the way we say them, when we say them. I am going to do it a little bit different tonight. What I'd been doing up to this point was literally just going chapter to chapter to chapter. And what that can result in is that at one moment we're talking about when to speak. At the next moment we're talking about how the foolish man talks. And then we might be right back to when we should speak and when we shouldn't speak. And so I've been changing topics and gears fairly quickly. And as we wrap up, I want to switch it around a little bit. But what that's going to result in is that you're going to bounce from chapter 26 to 27 to 29 to 31, and then you might come back to 27, and we might go to 28 and 30 and 31, right? And so I'm going to take these remaining verses dealing with our mouth and kind of divide them up into categories. There's several different ways you could do this, and there's a few that you could join together or maybe put in several different topics. So this is just my own little categorization here. So some of the remaining verses, and really there's probably about 3 verses I would say that are going to fit into this. I would describe these verses as how to deal with a fool. How to deal with a fool. Okay? These next 2 verses are 2 of my favorite Proverbs, and they're side by side. Proverbs chapter 26, verses 4 and 5. Proverbs chapter 26, verses 4 and 5. Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest thou also be like unto him. And then verse 5, answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceit. Now, before we tackle those 2 verses, I also want you to turn over to chapter 29. Chapter 29, verse 9 says this, and we'll kind of look at these 3 verses together. If a wise man contendeth with a foolish man, whether he rage or laugh, there is no rest. So if we think about these 3 verses together, they're really kind of driving to some degree at the same point. And that is, when you come in contact with what is truly a foolish person, okay, your argument and your contention with them and your trying to get them to see wisdom to some degree is folly. Now, you have to be careful with this because there are some people who are just being foolish, or they're uneducated. They haven't been taught, they don't know any better. And then there's those people who it's almost as if their lifelong goal is to be the biggest fool they could possibly be, right? And there's no convincing them. They love argument for argument's sake. They love to be different. They love to just be out there for the shock factor. It's really not about getting to the truth. It's really not about this pursuit of wisdom. It's shock factor, or it's just always wanting to be contentious, or they have just flat out absolutely made up their mind and are never going to be convinced otherwise, right? I'm sure you've probably ran into a few of those. If you haven't, I hate to tell you this, you are going to run into people like that. And I think as I think about those types of people, the Bible has given us some advice that to some people looks a little contradictory, because as I read these 3 verses, am I supposed to confront a fool or am I not supposed to confront a fool, right? Because on one, it tells me that if I do it, there's going to be no rest. And another verse tells me that if I do it, if I'm not careful, I'm just going to be in folly my own self, right? But yet then there's the other one that says, no, you actually should confront a fool, lest he be wise in his own conceit. How do you make all of these things jive together? Well, I think part of this is go into this with your eyes wide open, okay? When you're dealing with a full-fledged fool, well, that's really hard to say, full-fledged fool, you are going to speak till you're blue in the face and probably not make much progress with that individual, right? Whether you are laughing or raging, or whether they are laughing or raging, as you contend with a fool, it is going to be weary. And you are going to be so tired and exhausted by the time this thing is done. Just know that going in, right? That's the first thing I would say. Know it going in. Because sometimes you go into this with great hope and great zeal and convinced that you are going to make a difference. Know that with some fools you will never make a difference with that individual. You just won't. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't pick up the battle and have it. But maybe not for the reason you think, right? And I think in order for these to make sense, you really do have to merge these together. Be ready. Know that it's going to be exhausting. Know that if you're not careful, you're going to end up in folly yourself. Okay? But also know that there is a time where it is worth that battle. And I would say it this way. 2 reasons I think that it becomes worth the battle. One is even if you're not going to change that fool's mind, he needs to know that there is opposition to what he's saying. And he don't need to just be able to go off and continue to spout it without confrontation, because if he does, he's just going to think that he is right in his own conceit, right? Like he is going to be lifted up and nobody challenges, nobody pushes back. And to some degree, occasionally the fool needs to be challenged. If for nothing else, and this is the second point or reason why, others need to see his foolishness. Others need to see that there are arguments and counterpoints to what's being spouted off foolishly. And sometimes there may even be, I would put this, I don't think this is the third category, but I would put it in the same one where others need to see. Sometimes a fool needs to be confronted, not because you're going to convince him, maybe not even for those around that need to be convinced, but sometimes there are those that are suffering because of what the fool is doing and saying, and they need to know that somebody's willing to stand up and be a voice for them. Does that make sense? Right? I may not have should have used it, but I've used these 2 verses in response to Facebook posts before. right? And again, the idea is not because I thought I could convince the person that was saying the foolish things, but because I knew of the harm that was being done to those that were hearing it and reading it. And I really think personally that's why these two verses are side by side. Be careful when you confront a fool, because if you're not careful and you're not prepared, you can end up just being in folly like they are. But when the time is right and the conditions are right, and for the sake of others, you do need to go into that battle fully prepared for what it's going to be, but it's worth it, right? Know when to say something and when not. There are times where, listen, I may just let a fool continue to ramble. In the end, he's only making a fool of himself, and it's okay. And there are other times where it's not okay because it's causing great harm to others, and it's time to step up and confront it, right? And that's the way that I would tie those three verses together. That one over in Proverbs 29, just know that it's going to be exhausting, right? It's going to be exhausting. And it truly is, guys. It's exhausting. But there's times when it's worth it. And so with that, I could say more, but I will stop because I don't want to beat a dead horse. So other than dealing with fools, what else do we find here in these verses? I'm going to group some of these together as the fool, the liar, the flatterer, and the gossip. Okay? The fool, the liar, the flatterer, and the gossip. In Proverbs chapter 26, verse 18, and we're going to actually do something here where we're going to read a stretch of verses together versus jumping around. It says in verse 18, as a madman who casteth firebrands, arrows, and death, so is the man that deceiveth his neighbor and saith, Am I not in sport? Where no wood is, the fire goeth out. So where there is no talebearer, the strife ceaseth. As coals are to burning coals, and wood to fire, so is a contentious man to kindle strife. The words of a talebearer are as wounds, and they go down into the innermost parts of the belly. Burning lips and a wicked heart are like potsherd covered with silver dross. He that hateth dissembleth with his lips, and lieth up deceit within him. When he speaketh fair, believe him not, for there are 7 abominations in his heart. And we could read a few others, I'll stop there. But I think in this you see several things. You see the fool, you see the liar, you see the flatterer, and you see the gossip. Now turn over briefly to chapter 29 again, and I'll add one verse to this. Proverbs chapter 29, verse 5 says, A man that flattereth his neighbor spreadeth a net for his feet. You see here this idea in both places, a flatterer, a talebearer, or a gossip, a slanderer, a liar. They all do what? They're actually causing great harm. I think that's the picture that you see here. In Proverbs chapter 29, verse 5, a man that flattereth his neighbor spreadeth a net for his feet. Now, that might seem harmless at first, right? A man that is a flattereth his neighbor spreadeth a net for his feet. The context there is that be careful of the person that is quick to flatter others and he's just poured on super thick. There are probably ulterior motives, and they probably aren't good for you, right? The idea here is that he is about to trip you up, right? He is setting a trap for you. Be cautious of those that pour on the flattery really thick, right? It probably is not well-intentioned in the end. And I would urge caution for yourself too, right? Be careful how you're flattering others. Listen, there is a difference between flattery with the intent of buttering somebody up and true, heartfelt, sincere gratitude and appreciation for somebody. As a matter of fact, the next section that we're going to talk about talks about, let another man praise thee. And there's even a verse that we'll cover then that talks about her children rise up, right? And her husband calls her, praises her. I'm butchering it here. But listen, there is a time and a place for you to stand up and call out people that have done and accomplished something, and you're thankful for it, and you're thankful for them, and you praise them. That is heartfelt and sincere, and it's usually not like overdone. And then there's flattery. And the flattery is more this idea of, I can't say anything like, oh, you're wonderful and you do perfect and it's amazing and I can't believe it and you look good and you talk good and everything you touches is wonderful, blah, 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 blah. But somewhere in there, I'm going to accomplish a couple things. I'm either going to get something from you I want, or if I'm not careful, I may butter you up so much that I start to instill a little bit of pride and folly in your own heart. Right? So be careful of liars, flatterers, and gossips. And when you go back to Proverbs chapter 26, I love this picture. As a madman who casteth firebrands, arrows, and death, so is the man that deceiveth his neighbor and saith, am I not in sport? He says harmful things. He says deceitful things. He tricks. He lies to. He deceives those who should be close to him. And if he's caught, he just says, oh, I was just kidding. I was just joking. It's no harm done, right? It's just in sport. The Bible says that that is like casting arrows and stones and a guy that is just willy-nilly casting out death. It goes on to talk about, you know what, if there's no wood, the fire goes out. So where there's no talebearer, the strife ceases. Where there's nobody that's out there to just spread the good, juicy gossip and keep telling it from one person to the next person to the next person, and turns something that's either not true or out of context into this big, giant problem that just keeps getting worse and worse. You want the fire to go out? Well, stop feeding it fuel. It says that the words of a talebearer in verse 22, the words of a talebearer are as wounds that go down into the innermost part of the belly. This is describing that the words of somebody that deceives, it is destructive. The words of a slanderer or a gossip cause great damage. As wounds that go down into the innermost parts of the belly. Burning lips and a wicked heart are like a potsherd covered with silver dross. The lips that are quick and zealous and passionate about spouting off deceitful things, slanderous things, gossip-type things. It's damaging. It hurts people. Silver dross, by the way, is the filth that's left over in the purifying process of silver. He's describing the talebearer as somebody who looks like a broken piece of pottery that was covered in silver, but when you get up close to it, it's just a broken piece of pottery with corrupted, polluted sludge. And when it says in verse 24, he that hateth disassembleth with his lips and layeth up deceit within him. When he speaketh fair, believe him not, for there are 7 abominations in his heart. When you've got somebody, first off, those that are lying and deceitful, if you get down to the heart of the matter, they are haters. You go about causing that kind of destruction, you're spreading hate. But let me take these 2 verses together for a second. You got somebody that has a reputation of being hateful, and that you have seen him literally just take somebody and tear them apart with his mouth. You better be careful when that guy starts talking nice to you. When that guy starts speaking fair to you, you better watch out. Because more than likely, the Bible says his heart is full of the 7 abominations. So, as we look at these verses, and I'm hitting them fairly quick, I think I've actually brought a whole sermon one time on these passages. So I'm giving you the short version. Lying, deceit, gossip, flattery. These are harmful, destructive things. Don't take part in them. Be aware of those that do, and be cautious around them. And when somebody that has a reputation of tearing other people down suddenly starts talking nice to you, you better watch out. Because it's probably that guy back over in Proverbs chapter 29 who's flattering, but he's really setting a net at your feet. Right? These verses can be good for us in regards to what not to do, but also as great warnings about the nature of people like this, and should be a good warning for us to be cautious. The next category, and there's several passages here, I'm going to put these into a category called when to speak and when not to speak. Proverbs chapter 27, verse 1. Boast not thyself of tomorrow, for thou knowest not what a day may bring forth. Be careful speaking about things that have not yet happened and boasting about all this that you're going to do and accomplish, because you actually don't know what's coming tomorrow, right? So be cautious about lifting up all of these plans and all of these great things that you're going to get done, or you're going to accomplish, or that you're going to do, or that you're going to be. You don't know what tomorrow holds, right? So don't be quick to just claim all of these things about your great achievements that you're going to do. You don't know what happens. How about, I'm going to use this one twice. I just will. I'll put it in both categories. Proverbs chapter 27, verse 2. Goes along with, by the way, this boast not thyself of tomorrow, although I think there's more involved in that, again, realizing that you don't know what tomorrow brings. But verse 2 says, let another man praise thee, and not thine own mouth, a stranger, and not thine own lips. You want to know when a good time to not open your mouth is? If your intent is to just spend the next half hour talking about how amazing you are. You know what? It sounds a lot better when it comes from somebody else. I knew somebody one time, and I'll use this from in a work context. Again, I like to give practical things so you guys know these aren't just cute little sayings. I knew somebody one time, and they had some decent talent. But literally every time they had an opportunity, they would be sure to be telling you about all of their talents and all of these things they did. And I think in their mind, they really thought, like, if I don't tell everybody, who's going to know? And it actually got super annoying. And it kind of started turning people off, right? And I sat down with them and I said, listen, you're on a good team of people. And in my experience, hard work, dedication doesn't go unnoticed. You don't have to spend all of your time convincing everybody how great you are. Let your work do that. If you do good work, people will notice. And it sounds a whole lot better when somebody else sends a thank you card talking about how much they appreciate what you did. That goes a whole lot farther than you having said it 20 times in the last 2 days, right? Like, it sounds so much better when other people say something good about you versus you always having to say something good about you. So, let another man praise thee, let not thine own mouth, and not thine own mouth, a stranger, and not thine own lips. That goes in a couple categories here, but we'll keep going. So, how about Proverbs 27, verse 14? My wife's going to grin on this one. He that blesseth his friend with a loud voice, rising early in the morning, it shall be counted a curse to him. Know when to speak, know how often to speak, know how loudly to speak. Now we do laugh at that one a little bit, right? He that blesseth his friend with a loud voice early in the morning. Now there is some debate, I will say, as to whether or not that means what you think it means. Although I would say both are probably true. I think the way we often think about that verse is we look at it and we say, I don't want somebody coming barging in early in the morning, hollering at the top of their voice, because I have just woken up, or you just woke me up, and that is not going to be nice. Or if you're really a morning person, you need a good hour or two before anybody says anything to you, right? There are others that actually look at that verse and talk about the fact that if you are so, I'm trying to paraphrase this and put it in my own words. If you are so quick and so eager to flatter and lift up and boast of your neighbor, of your friend, like, be cautious, be careful that you don't do that too quickly, too much, and it ends up being a curse on you because maybe you were wrong about that person. That's what some people say. I don't know. I could take it either way. I think there are truths in both. It's funner to think about it being the waking somebody up early in the morning and just being loud, right? But I think either way, you could talk about not being a good use of your voice. How about Proverbs chapter 29? Proverbs chapter 29, verse 11. A fool uttereth all his mind, but a wise man keepeth it in till afterwards. We talked about this a little bit multiple times already, but this one I think is pretty clear. Like, the fool just says everything that comes into his mind the moment it comes into his mind. A wise person is going to look at the situation. They're going to hold back a little bit until they have the whole story. They're probably going to put some thought into how they want to say what they're going to say, and then they're going to speak, right? We talked about it, I think, last time. The news media in this country is horrible at this, right? You got this much information, and everybody has to have a 24-hour news cycle and fill up every hour of the day about that topic, even though 90% of what they say is guessing and estimating what they think is going to happen. And then what happens? Does anybody actually trust the news media? Even those that still use it don't know whether they should. If they would just wait a little bit. There's a guy on YouTube that I watch, and I really like his approach. He has what he calls a 72-hour rule. And he's basically made the commitment that no matter the harm to his channel, he is not going to speak about something until 72 hours has passed since it was first announced. And even then, cautiously. I think that fits into this concept here, right? A fool uttereth all his mind, but a wise man keepeth it in till afterwards. By the way, not only does this mean take your time, get all the facts before you speak, it also means you may not say everything you thought. Weigh out all the things that popped into your head, which ones are actually going to be beneficial to come out of your mouth. Good advice. Let's see. We got a little bit of time here before I got to hit this last section. Proverbs chapter 29, verse 20. This actually goes, this really goes with that prior verse. Seest thou a man that is hasty in his words? There is more hope of a fool than of him. Now, to some degree, I think we're saying this man is a fool, right? But a guy that has just naturally got this inclination to shoot off his mouth without thinking about it, you got a better chance of a fool turning out to be a little wiser than this guy does. Reminds me of the verse that says, even the fool is counted wise when he doesn't say anything, right? Okay. Let's do this. We're talking about when to speak and when not to speak. Chapter 31, and by the time we get to chapter 31, we really have kind of changed gears a little bit, and it's less of this verse by verse thing, but I still think this fits. Proverbs chapter 31, verses 8 and 9. I'm going to read these two verses, and then we'll circle back and do some context. It says, open thy mouth for the dumb in the cause of all such as are appointed to destruction. Open thy mouth, judge righteously, and plead the cause of the poor and needy. Now, the way I would sum up these verses here is know when to open your mouth. And especially if you are in a position of authority or leadership, You have a responsibility to speak for those that can't speak for themselves. You are to be the voice of those that can't speak and are in harm's way. Now, the most direct idea for this, for a king, and that's really who this is specifically targeted to, listen, as king, you need to be on the watch for those that are, let's say, being about to be tried for some capital crime, and yet they can't speak for themselves. Be the voice for those that can't have a voice. Judge righteously for those that are poor and needy, right? Listen, there's going to be lots of people that are ready to jump up and stand up and defend and to be the voice for those that have the money to pay them, that can give them favors, who can recompense for you later. Be the voice that's ready to stand up for those that are poor and needy. Now, Brother Philip brought some great points the other day. Just because somebody's poor doesn't mean they're right. You still have to judge righteously. But I think the context here is saying there are those that are poor and needy, and they need somebody in a position of authority to come to their aid. Now, the full context of this is actually, if you go back and read the first few verses, it says the words of King Lemuel, the prophecy that his mother taught him. It says, "What, my son, and what the son of my womb, and what the son of my vows? Give not thy strength unto women, nor thy ways to that which destroyeth kings." I think this is here Solomon's mother talking to him about how to be a wise king and a good king. Now, unfortunately, he didn't listen on some of these things later in his life. But don't get wrapped up in that which destroys kings. It is not for kings, O Lemuel, it is not for kings to drink wine, nor for princes strong drink. You are in a position of leadership and authority, and above, not that it's good for other people, but listen, especially for those of you in a place of judgment and authority and position, you need to be clear-headed. Don't be intoxicated. He says, lest they drink and forget the law and pervert the judgment of any of the afflicted. People in positions of authority, it is even more important that they're clear-headed, clear-minded, that they remember the things that need to be remembered, and that they're right and just in their judgments. I think God is going to hold people in positions of authority more accountable when they pervert justice. It's bad for an individual person to be a false witness, and you know what the Bible said about that, right? I mean, there is great judgment on the false witness. But when the judge is corrupt, there's places that indicate that when the king or the judge is corrupt, the nation is in turmoil, right? And I'm very much paraphrasing here, this idea of, man, you want the people in authority to be righteous judges. It's in that context, right? And by the way, these next verses, gives strong drink unto him that is ready to perish, and wine unto those that be of heavy hearts. Let him drink and forget his poverty, remember his misery no more. Those verses, people quote oftentimes, those verses are in context of don't be intoxicated because it messes up your ability to judge righteously, to be wise and to be clear-headed and to do what needs to be done. And it's saying, listen, the place for those things is in this very limited focus over here. These aren't verses that excuse drinking. it's saying, look at how bad it can be when somebody is intoxicated. Don't let it ever be in a place where you are trying to lead and judge and go in and out among the people. So, good time to open your mouth for those that can't speak and for those that are poor and needy. And if you're in a position of leadership, make sure that there's nothing impairing you. All right, we're going to end with these few thoughts here. If you go back to Proverbs chapter 27, we're going to talk for just a minute about the words of a friend. Proverbs chapter 27. Let's read verses 5 and 6. Open rebuke is better than secret love, and faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. And then turn over to chapter 28, verse 23. He that rebuketh a man afterwards shall find more favor than he that flattereth with the tongue. And I realize I could have put this one in with the flattery, but I think it fits better with this idea of the friend. Now we think about friends, right, as those that are always by our side and are always in agreement with us. Well, that's not necessarily true, right? Matter of fact, somebody that is always agreeing with you, even when what you're doing is wrong and is going to cause you harm, is actually not showing themselves friendly. Because in the long run, them speaking nice to you and encouraging you to do what you're doing is actually harmful. And I think that's part of what these verses are driving at. Listen, I would rather have somebody who is a faithful friend come along and say something to me that hurts, but is true and needs to be dealt with, versus somebody that comes along and acts like they love me and lets me coast right into this big, nasty, ugly storm. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. There are times where a true friend is going to have to say something that hurts. The true enemy is the one that comes up and in deceit shows love, kindness, only to really be letting you go down a path you shouldn't go. And that verse 23 of the next chapter that we read a minute ago, he that rebuketh a man afterwards shall find more favor than he that flattereth with his tongue. It's that same thing. Listen, there may actually be times, and I do appreciate the fact that this one says afterward, because I think there's some indication that, listen, you may rebuke me, and in the moment, you ain't got much favor in my eyes. But the guy that comes along and flatters me, well, he's looking pretty good right now. But when the matter's all done, the guy that spoke rebuke to me is going to have more of my favor than the guy that led me further into the trap. You want to be a friend to people? Yes, be kind, be compassionate, be long-suffering, be forgiving. But know when you need to say something because it's for their best. The last few verses here, and this is actually a repeat, because we're talking about the words of a friend, right? Well, in Proverbs chapter 27, verse 2, we already read this. We're going to read this in one other verse. Let another man praise thee, and not thine own mouth, a stranger, and not thine own lips, right? It's better, we talked about this, it's better when somebody else is lifting you up. It's better when somebody else is praising you versus you praising yourself. If you turn over to Proverbs chapter 31, and I referenced this a minute ago, but now we're going to read it. This is talking about the virtuous woman. And it's already went down through this great list of things that she does. She's wise. She's a hard worker. She's taking care of her family. She's making wise decisions. She's doing what needs to be done, right? And it even says of her in verse 26, she openeth her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. She looketh well to the ways of her household, and eateth not the bread of idleness. And that is when it says, her children arise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praiseth her. We're already given this great example of that verse we read a minute ago. Listen, you go out and you do the work and the things that need to be done, people are going to take notice. And the wise friends that you have and the wise family that you have are going to rise up and they call this woman blessed. And they lift her up in praise and a position of honor. Right? So, be careful of flattery, because that is really done with ill intent for the wrong reasons. But I would encourage you to use your mouth to praise others that deserve it. Praise others. Lift them up. Encourage them. It's okay. You say, well, you're being contradictory. No. Sometimes it's a matter of the heart. Are you flattering, which kind of gives an intent that you've got some other purpose in mind? Or are you giving genuine, sincere praise where it belongs? So, be grateful to those who are doing much for you, and make sure they know it. Make sure they know you appreciate what they do, right? Now, as I recap all of this, our words can either tear down or they can build up. We can either be the fool and never know when to shut our mouth, or we can think about what needs to be said and make sure we say it when it needs to be said. We refrain from saying it when it shouldn't be said. And when we do say something, that it is actually something that's going to move people forward. And by the way, sometimes that's praise, and sometimes that's rebuke. But is it done in a way that moves people forward, lifts them up, encourages? Right? How are you using your mouth? I'd encourage you to think about these last three messages. It's been 3 parts. Think about and apply it to yourself. How do you speak? When do you speak? Who do you speak to? Who do you speak about? How do you speak about those people? The Bible has a lot to say about it. And the answer to those questions will define whether or not you fall into the category of a foolish person or a wise person. Okay? All right. We're going to go ahead and be dismissed in a word of prayer.